Hi, so I'm Chris Jiggins. I'm Director of Studies and the supervisor for the first year course, Evolution and Behaviour. And I'm here to tell you a little bit more about this course and tell you why you should consider studying it in your first year at Cambridge. So I supervise all of the St John's College students for this course, Evolution and Behaviour. So the course is really an introduction to the field of evolutionary biology. And evolutionary biologists sort of have a distinct way of viewing the world. We really focus on diversity rather than model systems. We're interested in why things are different from each other, why organisms evolve to be different. So comparative analysis underlies much of evolutionary biology. This comparative approach actually underlies a lot of modern science, and particularly I'm thinking here of genomics. So if we want to understand how genomes work, we need to look at variation. We need to look at how individuals differ from one another and how that's controlled by genes. And really the approaches that we use to do this all come from the field of evolutionary biology. So understanding evolution is really important for understanding genetics, genomics, medical genomics, a lot of kind of cutting edge areas. But of course, evolution is interesting in itself. It's the process that underpins all of biology. It's the reason we are here today. There's this great quote from the Russian-American biologist that nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. So evolution really underpins all of biology. So I'm going to go through the course a little bit, tell you a bit about the different topics that we come across. We start by introducing the basic principles of evolutionary biology. So we think about natural selection, but also genetic drift. So genetic drift is the random process of sampling of alleles from one generation to another that leads to evolutionary change, but isn't driven by natural selection. We think about the sort of levels of selection. So here I'm thinking about why do organisms, in particular, why do organisms cooperate with one another? So we think sometimes of evolution as being, or it's sometimes portrayed as being kind of raw in tooth and claw. Everyone's competing desperately with one another. But actually, when we go out and look at organisms in the real world, they're often cooperating. So why is that? We think about why individuals should cooperate, particularly with their close relatives, in order to propagate the spread of their genes. We have an introduction to population genetics. So evolutionary biology really fundamentally is a subject that focuses on populations rather than individuals. So we think about how allele frequencies can change in populations, how population size affects the strength of genetic drift, how that can impede the action of natural selection. We think about, sort of without getting too deep into the mathematics, some basic mathematical principles that underlie all of evolutionary biology. The second half of the first term starts by looking at the origins of life. So we think about the origins of heritable materials. So in other words, DNA and RNA. Where did they come from? What were the first organisms look like? And then we think about the evolution of complexity. So the eukaryotic cell obviously contains organelles, mitochondria, and chloroplasts. Where did these come from? And there are some parallels between the processes that happen at this very early stage of cellular life, where cells were coming together to cooperate with one another, and what we see now today, where we see cooperation between individuals in societies. Then we get on to plant diversity. We look at the diversity of gymnosperms and angiosperms, and more older plant groups. We think a bit about how genes control development. So in other words, how does a sort of a very conserved genetic program that produces the structure of the flower, how does that also evolve to produce the huge diversity of flowers that we see around us? And there's some links here in terms of thinking about how genes regulate development through to the animal part of the course in the next term. So the second term, we start by looking at animal diversity and adaptive radiation. We think about how you make phylogenetic trees with DNA sequence data. So how do we understand the relationships among organisms using DNA. We look again at how genes control development, but this is time in an animal context. We look at how genomes can be used to understand animal diversity. And then in particular, we're interested in how natural selection can drive adaptive radiation. So this video shows some cichlid fish from Lake Malawi. This is one of the most recent and rapid and dramatic diversification events in animal life. And we think about how natural selection can drive the evolution of new species. Then in the next part of the course, we look at the evolution of sex and behavior. And in particular, we're interested in sexual selection and exaggerated sexual traits. And here in this video, you can see these two dunnocks, which is a common garden bird in the UK. The male is pecking the cloaca of the female to try and get her to eject sperm from an earlier male mating. So we think about how these strange behaviors can evolve in order to promote sexual diversity. And then finally in this term, the second term, we look at human origins and human diversity. We think about primates, where humans came from in the primate radiation. And then we look at this amazing human fossil record, which, over the last sort of 20 or 30 years, we have understood so much more about human origins from its incredible discoveries of human fossils. And that's combined with also remarkable discoveries about genomes. So we've started to sequence ancient genomes, included in the Neanderthals and other close relatives of the human lineage. And that's given us some great insight into our evolution, including the fact that as Europeans, we have inherited part of our genomes probably from interbreeding between modern humans and Neanderthals, when modern humans first spread out of Africa and met the Neanderthals in Europe. And we think a little bit about the origins of human intelligence. And then finally, this is a new section of the course. We look at evolution and global change. And so we're interested in understanding how populations can respond to a changing world, how us as humans can manage to both feed the world and preserve biodiversity. We look a bit at crop domestication, how humans have shaped the plants and animals that we rely on for our food supply. And we look at biodiversity and how, how humans can try to preserve biodiversity in the face of a changing climate. Overall, it's a very diverse course. It's really fun. There's lots of great examples. You can always illustrate your essays with sort of interesting examples from outside the lectures, which will get you extra brownie points. Lots of great popular science writing on evolution, which can help to broaden your understanding of the subject. Some specific details. There's a field course, which is a great opportunity to get to know your fellow students and to learn more about diversity here in the UK. There are 3 lectures a week and weekly supervisions and essays and practicals every other week. And it leads on to, obviously, to evolution and ecology courses in the second year, experimental psychology and plant sciences. But I would also say it's obviously a really foundational course if you want to go into more cellular courses, and particularly also important for genetics, I would say. If you go on to do part 2 zoology, which is one of the final year courses that evolution and behavior leads on to, we have a tropical field course which alternates between Panama and Borneo. Sadly, it's not happening this year in the year of COVID, but hopefully we'll be on again by the time you get to part 2. This course was run partly by me, and here are a few photos from the tropical field course in Panama from a couple of years ago. So I look forward to seeing you in the autumn, and I hope you'll choose to study evolution and behavior with me in St. John's College. Thank you.